Help support Name Explain by liking this video, leaving a comment and subscribing to the channel. I've been explaining names on YouTube for over 4 years now, which seems like a really long time in YouTube terms. Like seriously, how has this not all caved in on itself yet? But during my etymological explorations on planet Earth, we've uncovered some truly fascinating stories of how the nations of our planet ended up with the names they have today. Take Pakistan, a seriously ancient sounding name that is simply an acronym of the states it's made up of, coined in a small house in England in the 1930s. Or New Zealand's name, which is the name borrowed from a part of the Netherlands. And of course Romania, which clearly has the name of the Romans in its name, despite the fact their homeland is modern day Italy. I shan't go into any more detail on how these nations got their names. They'll have their own videos of the channel, so go check them out if you want to. Now, while these are some really interesting stories as to how these countries got their names, not every etymology is actually that interesting. We're also some really literally named countries on our planet too. The ones that come to mind for me are the ones with cardinal directions in names, like East Timor, North and South Korea, Central African Republic, and of course South Africa. I think if you ask anyone why these countries have their names, they'll be able to give you some sort of correct answer. So we've established that some countries have really interesting stories behind their names, while others aren't as fun. In today's video, however, we're looking at a few countries whose names fall somewhere in the middle of this spectrum, or maybe a bit to the left of this spectrum, as they aren't super interesting like Pakistan, but not super obvious like South Africa. However, to me, that's what makes them so fun and interesting to look at. There's nothing I love more than learning something that's so obvious I feel stupid for not knowing in the first place. There's just something quite enjoyable about it. The way it makes you groan, or roll your eyes, or just sigh, hold your palm to your forehead and go, of course it is. If there's a word for this feeling, then please do let me know, and if there isn't, just make one up for me. You may or may not remember my 10 painstakingly obvious etymologies video, which, yes, by the way, I've since realised I used the words painstakingly completely wrong in the title of the video. It should have been just painfully, but painstakingly worked better because I talked about that word in the video. But anyway, if you've seen that video, you understand just how much I enjoy these obvious kinds of facts. Today's video is very much like that video, but we're focusing on just countries, and there won't be 10 of them, I'm afraid. The names of these countries might not make too much sense at first, especially to English only speakers like myself. However, once you find out what these names mean, the light bulb will light up in your brain, and you'll notice the elements of language you may have seen before tucked away in these names, and feel incredibly stupid but enlightened for not knowing them in the first place. Well, I did anyway. But if you knew these anyway, then congratulations, you are much smarter than me. So here are 3 countries with surprisingly literal names. At least that's what I think I'm going to call this video. Let me know if I didn't. The first country I want to talk about is the South American nation of Ecuador. Ecuador has a population of over 17 million, and while Spanish is the official language, 13 additional indigenous languages are also recognized by the state too. Their capital city of Quito is not only the highest official capital city on the planet at 2,850 meters above sea level, but was also on the first ever UNESCO World Heritage Site, along with another famous part of Ecuador, the Galapagos Islands, made famous by Charles Darwin and is seen as the birthplace for his theory of evolution. Also, a really random fact that I found out about Ecuador, it's one of the only 2 countries in South America that doesn't share a border with Brazil, the other being Chile, which is really obvious now that I look at a map. How had I not seen that already? It's one of those things that are really stupidly obvious once you know the answer, much like with Ecuador's name. So where does this name come from? Well, take a look at where Ecuador is on the globe. It's very much in the middle of the map, meaning it lies on the equator. Yep. Ecuador is simply the Spanish word for equator, as Ecuador is on the equator. Like I said, this is seriously obvious once you know the answer. Even to someone who speaks no Spanish like myself, it's criminally easy to see the similarities between the Spanish Ecuador and the English equator. Though, how did it end up with that name? There are many countries that the equator run over, and they aren't all simply named equator in their language, which is handy for us as that would make things rather confusing. But it would have given me an awesome video explaining why all these countries have such similar names. Anyway, the reason it has this name is due to the history that's taken place here. Initially, it wasn't called Ecuador at all. Initially, at around the year 1000 AD, the whole area that is now Ecuador was part of the Kingdom of Quito. This name derives from the capital city of Ecuador, which of course still bears this name. This city has this name as it was founded by the Quito people, the now extinct indigenous people of the land. The Kingdom of Quito, however, would change hands during history, eventually being absorbed into the Inca Empire. However, Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro conquered the land in 1532. Unlike with so much of South America, it became part of the Spanish Empire. It was around this time that the modern name of Ecuador came into popularity. Instead of using the native name for the land, Spanish colonists would simply brand the land as El Ecuador, which obviously means the equator, as the land is on the equator. In 1819, Ecuador was joined up with the nations of Colombia, Panama, Panama, Venezuela, and parts of Peru, Guyana, and Brazil to create the state which is now known as Gran Colombia. Gran Colombia was formed by political leader Simon Bolivar. He wished for South America to be free from Spanish rule and liberated these nations. When he did free these three nations from the Spanish control, he united them into one large country, Gran Colombia. His hope was to unite all of South America into one independent nation, though as we can see from a modern map that really didn't happen. Gran Colombia eventually started to fall apart, eventually collapsing in 1830. It was in this year the nation became independent and stuck with the name given to them by the Spanish, Ecuador. So why don't we move away from South America for a moment and go to Europe, specifically the European country of Montenegro. With a population of just over 600,000, you can see this country is a lot smaller than the aforementioned Ecuador. However, from what I can see, it looks just as beautiful, reportedly full of beautiful beaches, birds, and of course mountains. And it's those mountains that we'll be looking into today, as now you're more in the mindset of trying to figure out these surprisingly literal names. Perhaps this one's leaping out to you a bit more. If you haven't figured it out, then no worries, I wouldn't have either. The name means Black Mountain, and now that I've said that, I'm hoping it makes a lot more sense to you. Now knowing it means Black Mountain, I'm sure you'll be able to spot the two words in this name that gives this away. Mont meaning mountain and negro meaning black. Though why is it called Montenegro? The whole idea of a black mountain sounds very Middle Earth to me. And while there is a single mountain the name Montenegro is believed to derive from, it's nowhere near as menacing as anything in Mordor. The name is first mentioned in a charter for the King Mutlin in 1276. The Black Mountain of Montenegro is believed to be Mount Lovchen, which has forests and woodlands growing on it. The story goes that this woodland would become so thick the dark green leaves of the trees would seem black from afar and completely cover the mountain, in turn meaning the mountain will look completely black. And it was this one forest covered mountain the entire nation eventually became named after. However, if you are familiar with languages, then these two words may sound very Italian / Latin / Romance, which is rather odd for a nation when the majority of its official languages are from the Slavic branch. And in fact, this country isn't even called this in Montenegrin. Instead, it is called Zelena Gola, which still means Black Mountain. So why does a Slavic speaking country have such an Italian sounding name? Well, this is because this name of Montenegro comes from a time in history when the land was ruled by the Kingdom of Venice. These people would have spoke Venetian, a variation of Italian, so the name they gave the land would have sounded Italian. Over history, the land would be ruled by the Venetians and become part of Yugoslavia, finally becoming the independent nation it is today in just 2006. So despite the fact they are no longer ruled by Venice, it was this name that stuck around in English, and variations of it appear in many other languages. Finally, for the last nation I'd like to talk about today, let's go back to the Americas, Central America to be exact, and talk about the country of Costa Rica. With around 5 million residents, Costa Rica too is a Spanish-speaking nation like Ecuador. Perhaps the most amazing thing about Costa Rica, however, is its wildlife and its biodiversity. In fact, I read that Costa Rica has more than 5% of the entire planet's biodiversity, despite the fact its landmass only takes up 0.03% of the entire planet. That's a huge amount of diversity in such a small place. In fact, just off the coast of Costa Rica is Isla Nublar, an island home to the most amazing wildlife on our planet. Anyway, me rabbiting about their wildlife isn't going to explain their name, and you've probably been thinking about this name for some time now too. You know it's going to be really literal, so what could it be? Well, I'm sure Spanish speakers will know. The Costa part means coast and the Rica part means rich, so the name means coast rich, rich coast I should say. Though of course, why is this the case? Well, you can see from a map of the country the nation has two huge coasts, one going from north to east and one going from west to south. Though what exactly are these coasts rich in? Well, the classic idea is gold and precious metals. This name is believed to have been given to the land by Christopher Columbus when he discovered it in 1502. I've read two ideas as to why he gave it this name, one of those being simply because he believed the land to be full of precious metals, and the other being because he saw how much gold jewelry the natives at the time were wearing. However, I've also read that this may not be the case. Some believe Conquistador Francisco Hernandez de Cordoba actually coined the name as he explored way more of the country than Columbus, and I also read it's thought to derive from some native words too. All we seem to know for sure is that it first appeared in an official document in 1539, and the name has stuck around, simply meaning rich coast. Unlike with the aforementioned Ecuador meaning equator and Montenegro meaning Black Mountain, it's a surprisingly literal name. Well, once you know the etymology anyway. Costa Rica was suggested by Grey Computer, and thanks to their suggestion, they will now be honoured as Name Explain's patron saint of Costa Rica. Do you have a good idea for somewhere that's name could be covered in a Name Explain video? If so, then please consider donating on Patreon. Just $1 a month helps keep the channel running and earns you a weekly chance to suggest somewhere to be turned into a video, and you too could be a Name Explain Patreon saint. Thank you to all my patrons who support Name Explain on a monthly basis. Name Explain depends on small monthly donations from fans like you to help keep the channel running. Just a small amount of $2 a month helps in a huge way, grants you patron exclusive Name Explain extras, and gets your name here with all these awesome people. Thank you. Hello all, and thank you so much for reaching the end of the video. Stick around and check out another video and subscribe to stay up to date on all things Name Explain. You can follow myself on Twitter at NameExplainYT. Follow me there and tweet the name Fernando at me so I know you came from this message. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and once again thank you all so much.